you guys, the older alums tend to be the ones that want to take me out to lunch and treat me to something. And so it ends up being this really easy conversation, and the excitement that you have in that conversation is going to kind of touch a little bit with them on their excitement. It's going to remind them of their excitement with UCSD and things like that. And as you transition to giving, I wish I had a PowerPoint for this, but yeah, as you transition to giving, with older alums, some of the techniques that I've used that I think have been fairly successful are just talking about legacy, the legacy that you want to leave, that they want to leave. You could talk about, there's several different ways of giving back. I wouldn't imagine you guys talking too much about like retirement rollovers or anything like that, but talking about the legacy, talking about the value of leaving something with an institution that meant so much to you, especially if it really did mean a lot to them. I found that to be incredibly helpful. I met with an alum several years ago that she was in her 70s. Her husband had unfortunately passed away, but she was so passionate about UCSD and the arts and humanities department, the theater department, the library, all these different things that as she was talking, you just see her like beaming. And so it became this conversation of like, how are you going to leave a legacy as one of the first alumni from UCSD? She was graduated in the 70s. And that was a really meaningful conversation to have with her, and noting that she can really give, that she can make that impact, she can leave that legacy anywhere on campus. Yeah, and she ended up like doubling her giving right after that, which is really awesome. Middle-aged, I guess, kind of younger family alums, those can be really difficult as it relates to giving because they have kids, typically. I'm sure you guys have come across that. Whether their kids are young or old, if they're young, they're thinking like, I got to focus all my time and money and energy on my younger kids. If they're older, they're thinking, I got to save for college or start paying for their college or something like that. Those conversations can be a lot tougher, so that comes back to the participation rate kind of thing. Talking about those $5 gifts. Any gift makes a difference. I've noticed, especially, you can kind of have those questions of, hey, did your student receive any scholarships? You can start to get an idea of if they are paying for their kids' college, or if they're not, if their kids did receive scholarship. Not only will that mean that they have maybe a little more expendable income, but they can also you can start talking about the value of having scholarships at UCSD and how they know firsthand what public education now costs, so touching a little bit on the benefit of scholarships, especially at UCSD, things like that. And again, the 20, 25 gifts can make a difference. It gets their foot in the door, things like that. And then for younger alums, that's a tough one for me, honestly, because there are a lot of the times the ones without, and I'm sure, you guys are meeting with them, but I know I've come across them saying they don't have jobs, they just started, all that stuff. There's some challenges with that. But again, going back to the participation rate, a lot of times with the younger alums, I'm able to say, since I identify with them, I'm able to say, hey, I even give like $20, $25. I just have to find the area of campus that I'm most passionate about, and so it's scholarships, so I give back to scholarships. And they can identify with me, and they'll be able to identify with you guys, especially those of you that are graduating really soon. And if you guys, I hope you better all be part of GIG, but if you're not, you gotta talk to Ryan. That's right. Talk to Ryan about it. But if you guys are able to say, as students, I give $25 of scholarships because I want to help other students have that meaningful experience. That just brings on the shame, if we're being honest. If they know that you, a student that at best has a part-time job right now, is able to give $25, they certainly should be able to support themselves. And a lot of times, if I say I do it too, I kind of give them an option, like if you could support anywhere on campus, where would it be? It kind of gets an excitement as though they're going shopping, but instead of getting something in return, it's just a warm, fuzzy feeling. So that's kind of a little bit on those specific groups of people. I do want to really touch on some examples that are good ways to transition into giving. So who feels like they might have had a tough, take some time to think about it, but a tough transition into giving? What, if somebody could give an example of a time when they had to talk about giving and they just kind of got stuck? Cassandra, yeah.
I can think of one time where an alum, I brought up giving kind of normally. It wasn't like anything weird, but then they're like, well, actually, my husband just lost his job, and I'm like underpaid, and my kids are all going to private school, but I have to pull them out. Give this long story about all these things, and then it's like, okay, you know, it was hard to like go on from there. I kind of like had to jump out of the giving conversation just because she put all this pressure on me because of everything going on.
Yeah, that is tough.
That was one of my first interviews, yeah.
Wow. And you're still here.
And I'm still here.
Would anybody think of a solution to that? Or does that sound just a little too tough?
Worse.
Jump out of the game.
Okay.
Just say, oh, this is over now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely tough. Again, I honestly just go back to just the lowest amount, like $10 or something like that. And not in a shameful way, but just to know, like, hey, it really helps with our participation rate. It would really, you guys could even play the card, like, it would really help me out. Part of, like, my job is really to get as many, small gifts as possible, $10, something like that, $20. And then after they've had, hopefully, a really nice conversation with you, they want to help you out, if anything. Something like that. That's at least the way I'd go about it. Tell me.
So I've recognized that what really works is if you have a pledge card with you, then they'll just give so I interview a lot of my friends, and then the likelihood of them that time frame when you don't when you end the conversation and you send them that thanking email, they're not gonna click a button and fill in their credit card information and things like that. So my friends will pull out cash that they have in their wallet, and they're just here, take this, and then they'll fill out the pledge card. And so as long as you make that process for them a lot easier in terms of giving, they'll do it. Yeah. If it's just even a little bit. So maybe bring pledge cards to meetings.
Yeah. They should be if they're not.
I've got a stack of them. Yeah.
Okay. Make sure you're bringing pledge cards. I have plenty, but other examples that you guys might have had that were tough. And if you got out of them or were able to to steer the conversation towards giving, I'd love to hear that too.
I guess I had a couple hard ones where they were alums that weren't necessarily very enthusiastic about their college experience. So even trying to steer it away, with your help we could make it better kind of thing.
Yeah.
I had two that were very disgruntled about it all and just well, I don't really know what's going on there anymore, and I don't really have any interest right now. And then if I try to push, then it kind of becomes well, I also don't even have a job right now, and then they start to feel more negative about it. So in those times, I feel it's better to spin it around and distract from that topic, and then instead say something maybe in the future you'll if you first get reconnected back by just visiting the campus or going to an event, maybe it'll spark your interest and you'll be excited about it, and you can change your undergrad experience and have a better alumni experience.
Yeah. Another good piece to that can be, we know that a lot of our, hopefully you've talked about the participation rate at that point or talked about small gifts, but a lot of our events now have a gift component to it. So you can say you could even actually just come to one of our really fun events at Alumni Weekend or the Triton Connect that's coming up or something like that, and it's only $10 and $5 of that goes to student scholarships. So it's just a way to be hey, you're getting something. It's something really small, and you're especially if someone's unemployed or part-time, you're providing a value. You're providing the networking opportunity like a Triton Connect or any event at Alumni Weekend, and you're encouraging them hey, and by the way, part of that goes to our student scholarship fund, and it's just a good way for them to be oh, well, I can pay $10 to go to a sweet networking event, and great if part of it is a donation. That helps you. It at least gets them to start to think about philanthropy and small gifts and stuff like that. And that's more recent this year that we started doing a gift component to just about every event we throw. Others? Yeah.
Okay, I interviewed a professor at Stanford, and he was like obviously really successful and stuff, and like he'd been living in the Stanford area for like 15 years. Like, yeah, this guy was like, pretty up there, and then he was so against giving to a public school. He experienced that.
Oh, wow.
I don't want to go to a public school.
Probably
And I
donates
was
like crazy to Stanford, huh?
Why? But like he was just so like very adamant on like no to a public school.
Huh.
Yeah.
What did he say? Why not?
And I was just like, oh, why? And he was just like, I don't want to. And then he was like, once you give once, they keep calling you. And he kept going on.
And he goes to, and he works at Stanford, and he's saying that.
Yeah, he worked at Stanford. He was just very like.
If you like if Stanford can smell you, they're gonna make you donate, right? That's crazy. Well, who can have a rebuttal to the public education? I don't want to give to public education. Kind of. What's that?
We need them more money than politics.
Yeah.
Sure.
I wanted to tell him you went here. Like.
Yeah.
They hadn't given students yes before.
No, I don't think he had.
Then how did he know that we keep calling?
He said like constantly like gets calls. Like,
You know, if they haven't given, that doesn't mean
yeah, they still get.
we don't call them.
Yeah. And he was just like very.
Does anybody remember the number or the percentage of the public education budget that actually comes from the state of California?
Like 3%.
3.1%.
It's between 4 and 6. I'm
I think
not
it's
sure
like
where
4
it's
to
at
6,
now.
something like that.
Very
But
low.
so in those conversations, like if you feel bold enough just to say like, hey, a lot of people have that especially someone, you say he's been working at Stanford for 15 years, so he's been graduated a while, especially someone that's been graduated for that long and who clearly has only been in a private education setting, so they don't see a whole lot of fluctuation in tuition. He may not know how, number one, how much public education costs, number two, how little funding comes from the state. So at that point, it's just an education opportunity. And, you know, asking the question like, hey, how much, do you know how much public education costs now? Do you know how much public UCSD costs? 1 year at UCSD, all things included, is $30,000. Like, that's probably leaps and bounds higher than that guy paid. And then the other piece is like, and the state really, like, public education is pretty much private education at this point. You know, it's such a minimal, such a fraction of the cost is paid for by the state. It's becoming more of a private institution. I mean, you guys know that, but that's an opportunity for you guys to just educate them. And anybody else? Cool. So a couple just tips that I could give you guys as having done this for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews now. One easy way to start the giving conversation is to get it out on the table really early. So say like, hey, I know so what I'll say after I meet with someone is, hey, thanks for meeting with me. I know my email can sound kind of vague sometimes, so let me just let you know what I do. In the last couple of years, we've really boosted our alumni outreach because we really want to create a stronger alumni network. It's becoming more and more relevant in higher education because we want our alumni to be involved through coming to events. We want them, helping out our students, giving back to student scholarships, things like that. And And so at least at that point, even though it was kind of a soft, and I just kind of dropped it on the table without saying hey, I want to talk to you about giving, I've at least already said, let's talk about, or I've at least already said helping support student scholarships, or saying something along those lines that gets giving on the table really early. And so when you can come back to it later and be like, so earlier I was mentioning helping out student scholarships. Have you ever been able to give, or have you ever given to student scholarships or something like that? Even if you look them up, are they in Friendraiser? Are they able to see?
They can see the full profile, including giving information.
Cool.
Yeah.
So even though if you guys already know, just act like you don't. That can just make it a lot more, seem a lot less threatening. So getting it out on the table really early. Oftentimes I'll also say we look to engage alumni in 3 different ways: coming to events, volunteering, and giving back. And again, obviously that can kind of help out with transitioning the conversation really early into giving. a lot of times I've found that the second I say giving back or donations or philanthropy or something like that, they want to talk about it right then. Because they want to say something like, oh yeah, I got a phone call recently. Or like, oh, I actually gave UCSD last year. Or like, something like that. So it smooths out the conversation really easy. And then another suggestion or tip that I've used is kind of towards the end as I eventually do get to giving, or whenever I get to giving in the conversation, and just being really honest about it and be like, hey, I'd love to, part of what I do is, it's the Alumni Association, so part of what we do is giving, and I just really want to have a candid conversation with you about it. I want you to be totally honest. And that just comes off as a lot less threatening, a lot less abrasive. They're more open to just being honest about why they do or do not give, things like that, versus saying like, hey, do you give to UCSD? That just comes off as a little harsh. They're going to give every kind of excuse as to why not, and they feel like if they don't feel like they can be honest with you. They'll give you all kinds of excuses as to why not, versus saying like, hey, I'd just love to have a conversation about it. You're not saying like, hey, I'm going to ask you to give right now. Eventually you will, but it starts out a little less abrasive. Other things, major don'ts, don't lie. If you're in a giving conversation, don't throw out numbers that aren't there. Don't say that like 90% of our alumni donate or something like that. That's not true. Don't throw out numbers that you can't promise. You can't promise that if that person gives $10, that we already have 10,000 other alumni that are giving $10, so therefore we have that much money for student scholarships or something like that. Don't make any promises you can't keep. If they say, I'd really love to give to a really specific fund, and you don't know if that fund exists, don't promise that fund exists. You can say you can look into it, but the second you promise them, they're going to expect it, and if you're wrong, then their most recent experience with UCSD is a lie. So make sure you've done your research beforehand. Don't promise anything you don't know is there. If you know a fund is there, an example I had recently, I met with an alum that was his best experience at UCSD was playing for the club lacrosse team. I had no idea if there was a club lacrosse fund, so I said and I can look in to see if, he said he would never get back to UCSD, but I was like, even if it was like a lacrosse team or something like that, I said, well, if there was like a lacrosse fund, and I said, well, I can certainly look into it, and then I looked into it, and sure enough, he ended up being able to, I found this lacrosse fund, and he ended up supporting it, so it's an exciting thing for that, and I had no idea if that fund was actually there. I had to look it up later, but I did say hey, I can look into it and find out for you. So don't make promises. Say you'll look into it, and yeah, like I said, just don't lie while you're in it. You're potentially going to be their first good experience with UCSD as it relates to giving. So keep it honest. Keep the integrity up there, and yeah. Wow.
Armin's having fun.
Yeah, tell me to close the door.
Do you guys have any questions for Wil? There's got to be some out there. Maybe what would you do in this situation? Well, what would you do in that situation?
I know I present to you guys a lot, but
let's talk about it. Who's got some questions?
If not, that's fine.
There's got to be one here. I can think of one.
Sure.
So, no matter what the age of the alum, you pick up that they have wealth indicators. How do you go about the conversation differently when you know that they have them?
Yeah, I think so. If I ever meet with someone that actually isn't just a recent grad, and I meet them downtown at a law office, or I meet them in Serrano Valley, and it's clear that they're like a senior engineer at Qualcomm or something like that. I'll still do kind of the same tips and tricks that I mentioned earlier. How to bring up giving really early. Talk about having that candid conversation. But I also, sometimes it's not even specifically giving that I offer as much as, so an example I had recently, I met with an alum that was a manager at a pretty big biotech company that's exploding right now. And so I met with her, and her and her husband, she wasn't super passionate about biology or the research, biomedical research or anything like that. But her and her husband are really passionate about theater and dance and kind of the arts community in San Diego. And so I told them I had colleagues that I had a colleague I could pass her along to, I could introduce her to, that could let her know about the opportunities within UCSD and the arts department and the theater community, and let her know about different things that we have going on within San Diego, or partnering with San Diego, this community of San Diego, the city of San Diego, as it relates to the arts. And that way it was not necessarily immediately talking about giving, but because she was a little bit higher level, I could introduce her to our development officer that oversees arts and humanities giving, and that way it's not coming off quite as abrasive, and you're honestly presenting them with something that is relevant to them and they really feel like could benefit them. But handing off to development officers is really, really important if you ever do meet someone that has a lot of dough. So don't be afraid if someone seems like they could give at a decent level. Don't be afraid to let Ryan know and make sure that person gets passed off. Yeah.
So some of the things we want to answer about the alumni after meeting with them are some of the causes that they're passionate about.
Sure.
How do you differentiate? I mean, there's you can ask one question like what type of university causes are you passionate about?
Sure.
But that's kind of vague. There's like 100 billion things to be passionate about.
Yeah.
What are some ways to break that down into like maybe one or two questions and ask them, what are you passionate about, in the academics, just kind of break it down into different parts maybe.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that's kind of, you could, just like you said, ask, like, what are you passionate about as it relates to UCSD? But I think a lot of that is not so much the questions you're asking, but just listening to them as they're talking. You can certainly ask, if you had one extra day in the week, what would you do with it? And I mean, that doesn't sound like it's related to UCSD at all, but if they say something like, I would volunteer at I would be a volunteer nurse at like a health clinic or something like that. Well, we have a fund that constantly needs support, and it's our student-run free clinic put on by the School of Medicine. And so had you not asked, that question, what would you do with an extra day in the week, you might not have gotten that answer. Just really open-ended questions that allow them to sit back and think like, hey, what am I passionate about? Help them discover some of those things. Another question. Think of any of those from that list.
If you had like $1 billion, what would you do with it? Like stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, you could ask.
That was on that list.
That was on that list. You could honestly say, if you could support any cause, what would it be? And if it doesn't relate directly to UCSD, I'm sure you can kind of figure out a way to tie it back to UCSD. There's a list of those kind of questions, and if you could find it, you could.
I've got a good one-pager. Yeah, of just they're questions that take the conversation deeper. And specific sections about passion areas and how to pull that out. I'll definitely send it out. It's really really helpful.
Yeah, and another thing is, again, not necessarily because that would be kind of a random question to just ask, like, hey, if you had one extra day, if you're talking about UCSD, and then you just say, like, hey, if you had one more day in the week, what would you do with it? That's going to be awkward, but it's as they start to talk about, for me, as they start to talk a lot about their experience at UCSD, they say that they had such a great time. Their favorite class was, I don't know, molecular biology or something like that. Just prying more. Like, why was that your favorite class? Oh, well, I just really loved the research that was, the newest research that was going on that my professor really taught. Oh, what was that research? Oh, it was about, the way that they're using these new, medical devices. I learned about these new medical devices that have helped out with monitoring babies when they're first born. Something like that. Now all of a sudden you kind of know that they have this passion for child development and medicine and things like that. And so it's just really asking, as you're getting to know their UCSD story, why those things were really important to them, relevant to them.
Good question.
Yeah.
It is good that you get along with a very fulfilled experience at UCSD and afterwards.
Yeah.
But most of our alum are normal people, and their stories
It's true.
are literally dull, and I will find it really difficult to take something out of their experience. They just attend classes, sometimes missed some,
Yeah.
and do not do sports, do not take part in the school events, do not join a club, and hang out with friends once or twice on weekends, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's very normal.
Yeah.
I mean, for a 1 hour conversation, you
Yeah.
have to talk about all this stuff over and over again. How to bring it, how to bring something deeper from this kind of conversation.
Yeah. I'd want to find out why they didn't get involved, like what prevented them. And a lot of times I met with a lot of like commuter students, for example, people that transferred from community college, right? That they grew up in San Diego, they went to, Miramar College, or they went to Mesa College or something like that, and they lived at home, commuted the whole time, didn't get involved, went to UCSD for classes, came home otherwise, or stayed in the library all day, something like that. And yeah, those are definitely tough, but I mean, to get a little deeper, you just start to ask, like, hey, well, why didn't you get involved? Oh, well, I just didn't necessarily have the time. I was doing all these other things, trying to pay for school, things like that. And then just ask, like, what were these other things that you were doing? Well, I was volunteering at this. I had this part-time job. Yada yada yada. Another good question that always it applies to every alum is, why did you choose your major? And you start to, hopefully they have a legitimate reason. They didn't just say, like, well, I couldn't think of anything, so I just decided to major in psychology or something like that. A lot of times, there's passion behind why they chose their major. I was a good example of someone who didn't. I started as bio because I really wanted to pursue like sports medicine, things like that. I ended up not being able to hack it at UCSD in the bio department, so I changed to psychology. While that may have seemed like a default at the time, I'm actually really, really passionate about like child development, psychology, therapy, things like that. And I, even as a college student, when I wasn't thinking, oh, that's what I'm really passionate about, there was something in me that drew me to psychology rather than any other major I could have gotten a degree in. So finding out why they chose their major applies to everyone, because everyone got a degree, right? So cool. Any other questions?
All right, I want to open the floor then to Todd and Katie to shoot away if you have any questions for the team you want to answer.
So we are starting this from scratch.